in the Middle East. This is blind violence of an unprecedented brutality. Faced with this situation, many questions arise legitimately in our country, as well as concerns. In this context, I felt it was useful and necessary to hold this debate on the situation in the Middle East. I know that most of you wished for this debate to take place. I cannot speak without coming back to the facts. On last October 7th, a barbarous terrorist attack was carried out by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad against Israel. Hundreds of civilians were massacred. These were abject crimes that were committed against them. Every day, we learned about more and more atrocities, savage murders of young people at a festival in the desert, horrors committed in kibbutz at Be'eri, Faraza, and Rim, women, children, old people kidnapped or brutally murdered. In total, about 1,400 people were killed in these terrorist attacks in the month of October. 2 American hostages have been liberated, but more than 200 people are still held hostage. Among the victims, 30 of our compatriots were killed and 7 are still reported missing. This attack cannot be compared to the violent episodes that we have previously seen in this region, unfortunately. But this barbarous attack ordered by Hamas shows that there is a real change in scale and nature of the violence. This was a complex, premeditated action targeting Israel and its population at their very heart. Before I continue, I wanted to come back to these events. As the President has said, and as I have said here in this room, I wanted to say again that I am completely in solidarity with Israel as they face this difficult time. I have special thoughts for our French victims and those who are missing, for those who are, for their loved ones and their family. We support them throughout this ordeal. To minimize or justify or absolve terrorist acts would be to accept that these terrorists strike again tomorrow in Israel, in France, or elsewhere. There can be no room for ambiguity. The President of the French Republic has affirmed this forcefully. Israel has the right to security. Israel has the right to defend itself within respect of international law. And those who call for the right of the Palestinians to their own state as a justification for this attack are committing a moral and strategic error. This does not serve the Palestinian cause. Let us be very clear. Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas is not the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority is our legitimate interlocutor, and they are calling for peace. Hamas, acting as it did, has deliberately exposed, in a criminal and cynical manner, the entire population of Gaza. They use the population as a human shield in acting this way, and they thus create difficulties or obstacles to peace, which all the Palestinians aspire to. When we talk about the thousands of victims in Gaza and the terrible humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we must not forget the scope of the crisis facing Gaza today. Families are broken. It is a tragedy, and tragedies cannot be addressed with with varying stances. We must take the same view of all tragedies. There are no lives that are worth more than other lives. The tragedy, the catastrophic number of victims have given rise to indignation around the world. We will always speak about our political opinions. That is the principle of the democratic debate. We can speak to our differences here, but we must speak responsibly. Collectively, we must be measured and we must take some distance from the situation. As I say this here today, I affirm that we support and that our government supports and that the chairman of the National Assembly supports Israel after the horrible accusations that have been made against it. Members of Parliament, since October 7th, the President of the Republic has been in close contact with the Israeli authorities with a key message: Israel, of course, has the right to defend itself against terrorism. Civilians must be protected. Any military response must take account of international law, including international humanitarian law. Civilians must not pay for terrorist crimes. Our country is very well aware. Our country is very well aware of the cost of terrorist attacks, and we reaffirm strongly that in the fight against terrorism, we will never give up. Democracies must have the right response to terrorism. Even in the most difficult combats, we must never lose sight of what makes us a democracy: our values, the respect for the state of law, including international humanitarian law. Our friendship and our solidarity with the people of Israel means that we must make this appeal. Israel should not fall into the trap of Hamas. Thousands of Palestinians have died in Gaza, including many children. The inhabitants of Gaza are in an extremely serious situation. 1 million people displaced cannot be forgotten. I am not forgetting them. But in this context, the government is mobilized on several fronts, and in recent days we have taken urgent and immediate steps as required. This debate should take place in all dignity, please. Addressing a member of parliament. First of all, we have been acting from the outset for the safety and security of our citizens. At the Foreign Ministry, we set up a crisis group. Our embassy and our consulate in Tel Aviv and our consulate in Jerusalem are working day and night to support the families of French people who have been reported as missing or who have been killed in the attacks. Our embassies in the region, Beirut, Amman, and Cairo, are also on high alert. Of course, we are taking special care of the families of those who have been reported missing. Last Friday, the President, as well as our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Catherine Colonna, met with the families of the missing French citizens. We are supporting them. With regard to these hostages, I would say most solemnly that we are taking all necessary steps for their immediate and unconditional release. Of course, I cannot say more at this time. You will understand why, because negotiations are ongoing. We are working with the French community on site to provide support. In 2 weeks, we have enabled 3,600 French citizens to leave Israel using civil aviation and the support of our army to bring them back to France. There are citizens stuck in Gaza in very precarious situations. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has spoken with many of them over telephone, as she did this while she was visiting the region, and we are deploying all efforts so they may leave the Gaza Strip. French diplomats, military personnel, and civil servants are doing their best, and I would like to pay them homage for all of their efforts in this region. France has been mobilized to help the population of Gaza. In Gaza, we must not underestimate the scope of the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe. They don't have access to basic services, water, food, and fuel. And no one can remain indifferent to this humanitarian crisis. When we look at the number of people who have died, we mustn't forget that these are families, women, children. How can we measure the severity or the consequences? Every time a civilian dies, it is a failure for the international community. We cannot abandon the population of Palestine. We must remain in solidarity with them, and nothing can question that solidarity that we share with the Palestinian people. This is why we are asking for a humanitarian pause, which would allow for the immediate access of water, food, and fuel, as well as humanitarian aid to Gaza. This should take place under the auspices of the UN, and the security of humanitarian workers must be guaranteed. 2 convoys have made it through Rafah Gate. However, in fact, everything remains to be done in order to supply the necessary aid to the civilian population. The Rafah opening is still very limited. We call for a wider opening of the Rafah Gate so that more convoys can go through. As Catherine Colonna said in Cairo this weekend, the distribution of aid calls for a humanitarian ceasefire, which we call for as quickly as possible. This is an important point, and I say this in particular to counter propaganda, in particular from Russia. France did support the Brazilian resolution at the UN in this sense, specifically in order to advance discussions at the UN Security Council. We want to bring an end to this violent period as quickly as possible. France has always supported Palestinian civilians. More than 100 million euros of aid in 2022 went to Palestine for water, health, education, and farming sectors. Faced with the current situation, as the President has said, we have decided on an extra 10 million euros in aid, and soon we will be sending a plane with humanitarian aid to support the people of Gaza. In addition, the EU, the prime supplier of humanitarian aid for Palestine, has decided to triple the amount of its humanitarian aid to Gaza, and 2 flights have brought more than 50 tons of food to the borders of Gaza. We will be holding meetings to further specify the aid that Europe can provide. I would like to take advantage of this moment to answer some questions that have been raised recently. It is legitimate to ensure that our humanitarian aid does not fall into the wrong hands. And yet, let us not make hasty judgments based on biased visions. Procedures set up to avoid any misuse of our aid use by Hamas or the Islamic Jihad. These terms of control are very strict and clearly are respected. With the agreement of the international community, including Israel, we supply aid under approved conditions, and our aid is supplied through UN agencies focused on specific needs, as I pointed out. They are controlled also by the Israeli administration itself. This is the case for our aid and the aid supplied by our partners. Ladies and gentlemen, the third pillar of action for France is the mobilization to avoid regional escalation. Since the 7th of October, the President of France, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Minister of Defense have multiplied exchanges with their counterparts in the region. These exchanges are ongoing. Catherine Colonna went to East Jerusalem, to Lebanon, to Egypt. She went back to Cairo last Saturday to participate in a peace conference. And the President of the Republic will be going to the region tomorrow, carrying with him our proposals for avoiding escalation. More broadly, France is mobilizing for a sustainable solution, setting up a political process for a two-state solution, because we know that the fight against terrorism must not overshadow the search for peace. There can be no sustainable peace for Israel, Palestine, and the region without a political perspective for the people of Palestine. The solution is clear. Indispensable guarantees for the safety of Israel and a state for Palestinians. This is the line that France has been defending constantly and that we will continue to defend. Sustainable security for Israel, a fight for eradication of terrorism in the region, and respect for the legitimate aspirations of all must be included together. We have a special responsibility in this region. The normalization of relations between Israel and other states in the region is something that we wish for. This could help reply to the legitimate aspirations of Palestinians and Israelis. We have a very big responsibility, which we accept. France can speak to all of these nations. We are friends of Israel, we are friends of Palestinians, and we are friends of Arab nations in the region. We have an independent position, which we have always assumed fully. We can act as a pivot. We can help advance the peace process. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, the situation in the Middle East is complex, difficult, and has led to terrible catastrophes, as we have seen in recent days. It has severe consequences on international security, and each country sees the results of this. In this context, France has a singular voice, a voice that comes from a long history and that comes with responsibility. We demand for justice. We have demands for the respect of international humanitarian laws. And we will continue to speak out. We must not give up. The only solution is peace. Thank you very much.